Webster is next on BCTV.
Good morning. Always the bearer of good tidings. Let me tell you now that Canada's federal government faces what could be a paralyzing strike of 50,000 clerks in its service. And we have here the man who is in the eye of the storm, Don Johnston, Liberal Cabinet Minister and President of the Treasury Board, because you must know right off the bat that the government has rejected the majority report of the Conciliation Board, and you know from the news how angry the clerks are about no COLA. I will tackle the details with Don Johnston after the break. Don Johnston is President of the Treasury Board of Canada. There's no doubt that you're faced now. Have you heard the results of the vote announced this morning in Ottawa?
I have not heard them officially.
Unofficially, 75% of 90% of the 50-odd thousand members have voted overwhelmingly to strike because your government has rejected the Conciliation Board report, which would have given the clerks, if I've got the figures correctly, 10% and 9% reduced work week and no cost of living agreement. Does this mean now that negotiations are finished, now that they've voted to strike, and it will become a fait accompli at a very early date?
Oh, not at all. In fact, last week we had established a Schedule 4 negotiation with the clerks, and negotiators will begin meetings Wednesday morning, now that the results of the strike vote are known, and we'll sit down and I hope hammer out a satisfactory agreement over the next 2 days.
But you've made your position perfectly clear. You will not give in to a COLA, will you?
Well, we are firmly against a COLA clause. A COLA clause was not recommended, as you just pointed out, by the Majority Board report. We also have stood firm on the reduced work week. We feel that as representatives of the people of Canada, during a period when we're looking for increased productivity, during a period when we cannot afford federally to increase the number of employees, which this would require us to do very substantially if this were taken right across the public service, which one would have to presume if it's given to a group of this magnitude. We don't think that it's in the interest of the country to reduce the work week. And of course, it doesn't put any additional money in the pockets of the clerks. What they require is a fair wage settlement, in my judgment, to meet the costs which they've incurred, and that's what we wish to give them.
Your fair wage settlement over the 2 years is 18%. Is that correct? 7%, 2%, 7%, and 2%.
Well, I understand if you compound it out, it comes to about 19.1%, as against the majority report, which comes to 19.8%.
But where you're sticking on is that you will not go to a 36.5-hour week from the present 37.5-hour week.
I think it's actually 36 and a quarter. That's correct.
36 and a quarter. You will not cut that because that means hiring more civil servants.
That means hiring approximately, in that group alone, 1,500 civil servants. If we take it right across the public service, it would mean adding about 8,000 to 9,000 person years.
But now, the clerks are not the most militant people in the government service, are they? And this would be their very first strike.
It would indeed, yes.
You must have driven them into a corner by not even meeting inflation for them out of the taxpayers' money. Is that not right?
Well, I don't think we've driven them into a corner at all. We operate on the basis, Mr. Webster, that we should be a fair employer, but we should not lead the private sector. We're in a period, as you know, when it's very important that wages be fair, but that they not be excessive. Now, we do total compensation comparability studies across the country to see where they are relative to their private sector counterparts. and we make adjustments accordingly. And that's the collective bargaining process. One expects the collective bargaining process over a period of time to move from both ends of an offer position on each end to something which is a reasonable settlement in the middle. Now we're, I think, at the point where we can make a fair settlement, and I hope that that'll take place over the next 2 days.
How can you, though, how can you afford to face a strike of 50,000 clerks? Now, I understand you've taken some steps to keep some at work.
We have designated employees and we have excluded employees. There are essential services for the safety and health of the public which require that certain people remain
Who are
on the
these
job.
people? 9,000, I believe.
Approximately, yes.
And what areas do they work in? Although I think I have the list here.
Well, you'd find them in all areas. You'd find them in ministerial offices. You'd find them, for example, with customs officers, where we have to have people at customs, and a variety of other posts of that kind, so that hopefully the service to the public would be disrupted a very minimum.
What about pension checks?
Well, we've taken steps to ensure that if that happens, people will receive their pensions.
So you've got 9,000 people, members of the union, who are told by edict that they cannot strike regardless of the union's decision.
They're not told by edict. Some of them are excluded, basically.
Personnel.
But the others are designated under a procedure before the PSSRB, which is the Public Service Staff Relations Board, and that, in fact, held back the conciliation report, because you have to have that designation process completed before you move into a conciliation board. And I must say the union was quite accommodating on that, Fanny, in terms of agreeing to certain designations. So we have quite a substantial group of competent designated
Mr. Stewart in Ottawa this morning at his press conference is fearful that you are going to hire scabs when they go on strike, or replacement workers, or bring in extra supervisory people. Do you have such a contingency plan?
Well, I have no contingency plan for hiring scabs. I might, as many of us may end up doing a lot of the clerical work ourselves, I suppose, during this period. You use other people that are in the office, I suppose, to carry out some of the functions. You have to operate as a government.
You will not hire additional people to move in to help you when it comes to the strike,
Well,
as seems certain.
I am not aware of any recommendation of my officials, and I have made none that would require the hiring of scabs, so-called.
I've got the kind of feeling that the clerks are perhaps the scapegoats in your somewhat feeble attempts to control your massive budgetary deficits of $13 or $14 billion.
Well, I think the problem, Mr. Webster, if I may say so, is we can't make the publics the scapegoats. Remember, this isn't my money. The government money doesn't exist. It's your money. It's taxpayers' money.
Well,
It's money of the people of Canada. And as I say, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the people of Canada to ensure that our settlements are fair as an employer, which they are.
But is this the tough year? Is this the year you're going to keep your feet down?
But I don't think this is a tough settlement. Do you think that if you received, say tomorrow, if we sat down at the negotiating table, a 19% increase, which is incremental, which is built into your salary from then on, that's an unfair settlement? Remember, this is retroactive to November of 1979.
That was when the contract expired.
That's when the contract expired.
Your minority report said 7% back to expiry
It
date.
was 7% in November, 2% in May, 7% in November, and 2% in May. That's over the years 79, 80, and 80, 81.
Mind you, they got much more retroactive pay under the majority report because that was 10% November 79 and 9% November 80.
Yes, but I've indicated, Mr. Webster, I think I mentioned a moment ago, that when we sit down at the table tomorrow, we're prepared to discuss the wage issue. We want to make sure that these people receive a fair wage for the work that they do.
The one thing you're firm on, though, you're not going to go for a cost of living agreement, nor for the reduced work week from 37.5 to 36 and a quarter.
Mr. Webster, I think you would agree with me that this is not the time we want to see reduced work weeks in Canada. This is not a time for decreased productivity.
Didn't you have a study lately that showed we don't get very much work with federal civil servants?
Well, of course, again, the irony of this situation is that this is the very group, classes 1 to 4 of this group, that were attacked by the Auditor General in his report. Well, attacked. His survey showed an efficiency level of 60.8%, and they came under a lot of flack. I defend them against that kind of criticism.
You don't believe the Auditor General's assessment?
Well, even if the Auditor General's assessment is correct, the fault is not to be placed on the backs of these clerks. If clerks in an office are not performing their duties efficiently and effectively, in my judgment, is because their work is not being properly programmed for them, and that's a management responsibility. And I've been trying to get at that problem, at the management side. So I'm not going to take advantage of this situation to criticize the clerks for inefficiency. That's not the reason I'm suggesting there be no reduction in the work week. I'm suggesting that we, as an employer, the largest single employer in Canada, should not give away that kind of reduced work week during a period of our economy when we're looking for increased productivity in all sectors and at additional cost to the taxpayers.
What would it cost to meet their demands right now?
Well, if you take it across the public service completely, it would cost approximately $150 to $160 million a year. Not their demand, mind you. That's the demand if you extrapolate it across the entire public service.
The entire civil service.
Right.
Do these people have indexed pensions, indexed to cost of living?
Yes, they have the index provisions which apply. They have, compared to the private sector, they have very good pension benefits, better than the private sector. I think if you look at the Conference Board study, which was published on compensation comparability, public-private sectors some time ago, you'll see that in terms of severance pay and fringe benefits, such as pension benefits, they do well.
But are you prepared to face, in the event of lack of last-minute agreement, a walkout of between 40 and 50,000 civil servants, regardless of what it does to the administration of the country?
Well, Mr. Webster, let me put it this way. We, in 1967, long before I was on the scene, agreed that we would have collective bargaining in the civil service. Collective bargaining permits two recourses. One is you go to binding arbitration. The other is you go the conciliation strike route. This is a natural product of the system. Now, I suggest to you that if we're not prepared to face a strike, then we shouldn't be in the collective bargaining business.
Webster and Don Johnston, President of the Treasury Board, Federal Liberal Cabinet Minister, after the break. I have a union official on the line here who's going to have a jab at the minister in a moment. But to make a cynical remark, which applies both to you and the union official, if a young man or woman wants it easy from now on in this country, all you've got to do is get your first foot on the ladder of the civil service. You're in there forever, all kinds of benefits, index pensions, and you need never actually produce anything for the country. Isn't that part of Canada's malaise, a feather-bedded, overstaffed civil service at all levels, too many governments?
Well, that's a perception. And,
an unfair one, too, I know.
You know, there's a grain of truth in every perception, but the reality, I think, is far removed. I think that certainly during my rather brief period in Ottawa since October of 1978.
You're a fairly new boy, just 2 years in...
Very new, and a severe critic of the system before I arrived. And I'm not saying I'm not a critic now. I think there are many areas to criticize. But I think you'll find a lot of hard-working, dedicated civil servants, and even the Auditor General has acknowledged that we probably have the best civil service in the world.
Even if in this area of grades 1 to 4, they only get 60% output because of your poor supervision in the civil service?
Well, first of all, you know, one can question the 60.8. I didn't go into the study itself in this discussion with you, but I said let's accept it.
Yeah, he's no fool.
I doubt if it's correct. Well, the sampling was very small, but if it is, let's assume that it's correct.
That's another public perception. But what kind of working conditions they have? What about this flexibility? Does that make their jobs better? This flex time business?
Well, flex time is intended to improve the quality of the work environment. It gives people an opportunity to arrange their days so that they can devote more time to whatever they want to do personally.
What do you mean?
Well, for example, they have a core period of 9:30 to 3:30. They have to be there during that period.
Right.
And they have to put in their, I think it's 7.5 hours a day, so that the provision basically is that they can come in early. They can come in as early as, say, 7 o'clock, I guess, on that provision, because you take lunch out of it, and they can work later. And they have certain flexibility of half an hour to an hour and a half at lunchtime and so on. Now, with proper management by supervisors in office, that can be a very effective way of working. In other words...
Oh, it can be a very sloppy way of working for 2-hour lunches.
I prefer to think that people like to work by the hour, work by the job, I should say, not by the hour. And I'm not against flex time, but I'd point out to you that that was given to this group. It's not in the collective agreement. They have flex time, which I suggest is a great deal more valuable than an extra 15 minutes a day for which they're not paid.
Before I let the union man at you, the effects of this strike, which look very threatening, you must admit that you're on the edge of the precipice right now. No doubt about it.
Well, I certainly prefer not to have it. I mean,
but the effect of this strike would do more than merely stop the clerical work in government offices from coast to coast. Would it not, in effect, halt mail service all across the country? Well, hinder it anyway?
Well, there's no reason why it should halt mail service across the country.
None at all.
Well, not at all.
Picketing on government buildings would surely be very awkward and hold up much stuff.
If there is any illegal activity, and if others do not observe their own collective agreements, then we would have to take appropriate disciplinary action, which we would do. I'm prepared. I think that the collective bargaining process is a process which is established, well established in terms of the rules that govern it, and if they're carried out fairly, then there shouldn't be the kind of situation that you describe.
Yeah, in the Surrey office, Surrey tax office, they've just had 48 casuals. Would that be purely coincidence, or could they stay on after the strike and help the scab?
I don't know the circumstance of that.
Is your philosophy as the president of the Treasury Board, and you're one of the ultimate negotiators in this, are you not?
Yes, my representatives are at the table.
Your people are
in very
at the
close
table.
contact with them.
They come back to you and you say, yes or no, you might recommend something to the cabinet or not.
That's exactly correct.
That's exactly correct. Now, if it goes to a strike, therefore, you'd have to suffer it. You could not in any way, shape, or form force them back because you gave them the right to strike by legislation.
The government in 1967 gave them the right to strike. I say the differentiate because I wasn't there.
Are you in basic approval as Don Johnston, Liberal MP, of the right to strike for civil servants?
I have raised very many questions about the right to strike in what I regard as essential services in this country. And I say that not with respect to the federal system only, as municipal, provincial, and federal. I've always been concerned about the right to strike in essential services because it seems to me to be a contradiction in terms. If a service is essential, how can you have a strike in it? And we've proven time and time and again, say with the workers of Montreal, whatever group goes on strike, that you legislate them back to work, which is a very denial of the right which in turn was given by legislation. So I raised that question with you.
They should never have been given the right to strike in the first place, civil servants. Eh?
Well, I wasn't in favor of it at the time, but we live in a different world today. There are a lot of things that we would not do with the benefit
This is
of
Mr.
hindsight.
Hadvik, Al Hadvik, who's business agent of the PSAC here, right, Al?
That's correct, Jack.
Have a couple of bashes at the minister.
Okay, Jack, you've already asked one question, and that's regarding the Mr. Johnston made reference to the fact that we're hiring no scabs. He's probably aware of the fact that the union has had some difficulty in keeping our members on the job, and I'm sure I hope he's aware of the fact that the action of Surrey Taxation Centre of hiring 48 casuals, an unprecedented number. That number has never been hired before, and this particular sensitive period has created some difficulty with our members there, and also our attempt to keep our members in and hopefully come to a collective agreement the next 2 days.
Were your members off the job in the Surrey Taxation Centre?
At the moment, but they have been. They were off the job Monday.
Are they back again today?
No, they're at work. But the action by the employer hiring 48 casuals is certainly not conducive to try to keep our members from exercising their legal right, which, by the way, they were in a legal strike position.
Well, they were in a legal strike.
6th.
They may have been in a legal strike position, but that is a legal strike. But there had been no strike vote at the time.
Well, I mean that's a process within the union. I don't really see the.
Is there yet to be
anything to do
just
with
a minute, Al? Has the strike vote been taken?
Yes.
We've concluded a strike vote, a national strike vote, and the result has been a 75% in favor of strike. I understand that's been released nationally.
And are you in favor of a strike regardless if you don't get your cost of living clause, your COLA clause?
Well, that's up to the members and of course the negotiating team and the bargaining committee in Ottawa.
Can your bargaining committee make a settlement without going back to the members again?
Again, that decision we made in Ottawa by the bargaining committee. Mr. Stewart indicated in the press release I heard that a COLA clause is the issue, and in regards to that, I'd like to ask. Mr. Johnston indicated that he couldn't give a COLA clause to this large group. Can you tell me why the Treasury Board has agreed to a COLA clause in the case of the clerks in the post office? I'm talking about CUP W.
Well, first of all,
why
okay,
should our members be treated any different? Why should there be a different posture by Treasury Board for PSAC members as opposed to members in other employees?
Okay, we've got the question.
I've got your question, and I'm not saying the point is not well taken. It is. That COLA clause is something which has been limited to the postal workers, as you know. It is
why is it limited, Mr. Johnson?
Well, because first of all, we don't think that a COLA clause is appropriate. We build in to the settlements which take place, and you've had many opportunities to negotiate, as many other bargaining units have had since the COLA clause has been in place with the postal unions. We regard the settlements we make as taking into account the wage settlements in the private sector, some of which have COLA provisions, some of which don't. So our settlements basically provide for that protection, and that's the way we'd like to keep it. If people ask for a COLA clause, then of course the basic wage settlement has to be a great deal less, and it becomes completely unknown as to what the actual amount you're going to receive is. I mean, there's no way that the Canadian public could be expected to support a wage settlement in the neighborhood of, say, 9 or 10% plus a COLA clause. So that's
No
something
way.
that has to be clearly understood.
I think.
Last question from you, Al.
Okay, well, I think those are the two questions mainly. I guess we're going to have to wait and see what type of good faith we're going to see on behalf of the employer at the bargaining table.
Well, I think. Let me give you this.
I don't have to reiterate it that we have our membership behind us, and
You certainly have, Al.
Let me give you this. Let me give you this reassurance. Let me give you this reassurance. As I pointed out in my introductory remarks to Mr. Webster, this is not government money or my money or your money. This is the money of the taxpayers of Canada, and we have a responsibility to them as well as to the employees. And we intend to be fair, and you can be sure that when we sit down at the negotiating table, that I've instructed my people to act in the best interest of both those parties. And I think that we should be able to arrive at a satisfactory settlement that will be a fair settlement to your employees.
Good. That's an indication that you'll come up a little bit from the minority position, isn't it?
Well, you might interpret it that way.
Well, what else can I say?
I suppose nothing.
If you're now deadlocked in that, and there's at position A and position B, you're going to ease a little. One more short segment with Don Johnston. Parachuted into a key job after a mere 2 years in politics. Landing along with Johnston. Is that the game? How old are you, Mr. Johnston? 44?
Right on. That's very good.
Don't look a day more than 43. After the break. I don't believe in polls at all, Mr. Johnston. I think they're all phony. Gallup polls, Goldfarb polls. You can get any result you want in a poll. And so I'm going to ask you a couple of pointed questions, and then I'm going to ask people this question. We'll see what kind of answer we get. Do you want Donald Johnston and the Liberal cabinet in Ottawa to cut the hours of work of civil servants who've already been regarded as 60% effective in certain areas, and to give them a COLA clause, which might cut in at whatever level? With the postal workers, it cuts in at 6%.
May I add to that, if I may?
Is that an unfair question?
Well,
Too loaded in your favor?
Well, I don't like, I don't like to get into the area of the 60%. I think that this group has taken a bum rap. I really do, in this area.
You're being politic.
Well, no, I'm not being politic. I mean, we all know that they're inefficient people in any group. There are a hell of a lot of them in
private industry.
You're darn right. And there are lots of them in politics and elsewhere, and in your industry as well. So, but as a group, I don't think that that perception is one that is fair.
Don Johnston defends the civil servants as 100% workers who give 100% effort.
Well, I didn't say that either. And
80% workers who give 80%.
Somewhere in between lies the truth.
Hey, what's your deficit running at now, Mr. Johnston? 14 billion?
Well, the deficit projected in Mr. McEachin's statement back in April was in the neighborhood of 14. The cash requirement, which has to be separated out from the deficit, is about 3 billion less. Now, that's the part that hurts, because that's what you have to borrow.
Taxes have got to go up, haven't they, in the budget? That's what McEachin said. You could concede that to me, Mr. Johnston.
Well, I didn't think that Mr. McEachin said revenues had to go up.
Well, what is that? That's a piece of sophistry if ever I had that.
Well,
revenues come up from one place in the main.
Well, no, they can come up through, for example, well, let me put
companies?
this. Revenue, let me put it to you this way. A deficit is gotten at by increased revenues or decreased costs. Yeah. And if costs
Have
go
you
down,
done any trimming as president of the Treasury Board? Have you refused any money, for instance, to the guy who's sitting over here, the Commissioner of Official Languages?
That's a very, he might respond to that question.
You don't want to tell.
Well, Mr. Yalden...
He just spent $3 million on a funny little French language monopoly game we're going to talk about.
Well, Mr. Yalden has a very important responsibility, but his responsibility is to Parliament. It's not to Treasury Board.
C'est vrai. C'est vrai. Okay, I'm asking people if they think that you, as the giver of all good things, should give civil servants a COLA and cut their hours of work. Where do I go, Gladys? Go ahead from Oliver, BC.
That's too bad.
Speak up, please.
Hello, Mr. Webster?
I want a short opinion. Don't want you to waffle.
This is, may I speak to Mr. Johnson?
only if you come to the point quickly. I'm not in a...
Well, my sister worked as a supervisor.
No, madam. Do you have an opinion on my question?
Yes, not in favor of it.
What? You're not in favor of it?
No.
Thank you. Do you have opinion on my question? Do you?
Are you talking to me now?
I'm certainly not talking to your mother. Your television set is up.
No, I'm for those benefits. And
Your father. Are you in favor of them?
Hello.
Yes, sir.
If Mr. Johnson paid those guys off what they were supposed to be getting, wouldn't he be able to collect enough income tax off them in one shot and balance the whole budget coming up, eh?
There's a clever little riposte.
Well, I don't think the arithmetic quite works out that way.
No, I know that. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I am in favor.
Oh, are you a civil servant?
No, I'm not.
A civil servant's wife?
No, I'm not.
Civil servant's mother-in-law?
No, I'm not either.
You think they're underpaid? What is the average wage of a civil servant in the federal government?
About 12,005.
Well, the average wage of this group,
Majority.
average age of this group is 12,005.
But it runs as low as 6,500 or 7,000.
No, it runs as low as I think it's about 8,000 in the CR1 and 10,000 CR2.
But you think they're quite well paid?
Well, the question is whether they're paid fairly in terms of the market in which the environment in which they work.
Yeah. In British Columbia, of course, the provincial civil servants lead everyone.
Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Webster. That you raise a very serious problem that I have, and that is that we have to bargain on a national basis, and yet there are enormous regional disparities. And
In your system?
well, no, there are regional disparities because wages are higher in BC than they are in Nova Scotia, for example.
Much.
So when we make a settlement with a national bargaining unit, the person in Nova Scotia may be very well served and may lead the market. In fact, will lead the market under the proposals which we've made. Whereas in Western Canada, he may just be at market or still just behind. It's a serious problem. I'd like to see regional negotiations.
Go ahead, please. Oh, I'd stop on that for a moment. You'd like to see regional
I'd like to see
negotiations
regional wage rates wherever we have national bargaining units where it's appropriate.
so that you could meet the appropriate standards
Exactly.
as against the provincial and private levels in that particular province.
Exactly.
Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes? Uh-huh.
As far as the shorter hours, I think that's a bargaining point.
That's a money point.
A bargaining point.
And what about COLA?
Cola? I think if you think back to the days of Turner and Trudeau, they offered every civil service group a COLA clause based on an annual review. I think that's all we want, is to maintain our status quo. The present system that the government is employing, not allowing a COLA, is always in their favor by giving less than what they should get.
Well, isn't that part of your battle against inflation?
Well, absolutely,
All we're asking
Mr.
for.
Webster. There seems to be a psychology that's being built into wage settlements that you should always match at least the consumer price index plus some. And I take issue with that in Parliament. We take the 7% or the consumer price index, whichever is less. And I think there's some question, as John Anderson raised in his debate the other night, as to whether the CPI is the right statistical series to use for those purposes. It builds in an inflationary psychology because you constantly see what is supposed to be the typical fruit basket, which may or may not be, rising in value, and try and pin your demands to it.
Go ahead to Mr. Johnston, President of the Treasury Board.
Good morning, Mr. Johnson.
Good morning, madam.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that the employees should be allowed a shorter work week.
No,
You
that's not his
disagree
view.
with me.
You disagree with them.
I agree with it.
Oh, you agree,
I agree with
that?
it. But, madam, do you realize that the employees already have what we call flex time or flexible hours, which we were discussing here a moment ago, Mr. Webster and I, which gives them enormous flexibility. Now, the shorter work week increases the cost to you, the taxpayer, across the public service by, we estimate, $150 to $160 million. And the 15 minutes a day does nothing to provide additional income in the pockets of employees to permit them to meet their needs.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
An absolute and definite no. After so many years of dealing directly with some of the departments in Ottawa, they just definitely do not earn what they're getting today in a good many areas.
Thank you, sir. That's a good, firm opinion. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to know why the small people get the percentage and the big people don't. How come his wages aren't negotiable?
Oh, the minister's on a
Are you talking about my wages,
Yeah,
madam?
no, that's not relevant. Not relevant, ma'am. Let's leave that, Mr. Johnston. Anyway, when
prepared to respond.
will the crisis be over? By the end of the week?
Well, I hope that we have some fruitful negotiations. Wednesday and Thursday, they will be intensive.
Are you prepared to give a little?
We would not sit down at the negotiating table if we weren't prepared to negotiate in good faith.
You're not totally inflexible.
We're never inflexible, Mr. Webster.
My thanks to, I haven't even mentioned the Constitution, thank God. I know, of course, that you're planning to bring it back unilaterally and cause all kinds of trouble in the West. Pity, isn't it?
Well, we aren't on the Constitution. I'd be glad to hear your views, though.
No, just let's leave it.
Those of your listeners.
My thanks to Donald Johnson. Who's waving? My thanks to Donald Johnson, President of the Treasury Board. And my next guest is a guy whom you finance, Max Yalden, the Official Languages Commissioner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Johnson.
Webster.
Best of luck in your negotiations.
Thank you.
You'll need them.
Thank you.
After the break.
No, what do you got there?
Just a minute, hold on. Vous inventez un ordinateur de poche qui traduit tout en anglais et en français. Bon pour une langue de votre choix.
Marvelous.
Congratulations.
Marvelous.
You invent a pocket computer that can translate into any language into English and French. Good for one language of your choice. What in the name of all that's holy are you, Max Yalden, a dignified, important official, civil servant, and commissioner of the languages, doing with little Monopoly games?
Well, I agree, Jack. I find myself somewhat confused coming on your program like a kind of a peddler with a linguistic peddler. But what we're trying to do is put out a game that we think will interest young people, 12 and over, maybe some of their parents as well, that by playing it, you'll find out a little bit more about the languages that are spoken around the world. You'll find out that virtually every country in the world uses more than one language. You'll find out that English and French are among two of the most useful languages in the world. And of course, if you play the game, you may even enjoy yourself. As I think it's been, I think you were remarking, it's a kind of a linguistic monopoly game in that you take over capital cities and you take over countries by by knowing the right language, and the person who gains the most capital cities or countries wins the game.
All right, now, it sounds terrific. Have you resigned from Official Languages Act and are you now peddling this for a profit or what?
No, sir, we're giving it away, or rather you're giving it away, because as my predecessor on the program here, Mr. Johnston, kept reminding you, it's your money that's paying for this.
Now, are you actually, you've prepared this for children of 12 and above?
That's right.
And the cost says here, in the local branch of the Southam chain, $3 million. Is that right?
No, that's not right. It's $1.3 million budget over a period of 3 years for putting together the game, development costs, printing, packaging, and the works.
How many have you printed?
200,000.
What are you going to do with them?
Well, we're going to send them out to young people who write to us asking for them, and depending on what we may work out with the Council of Ministers of Education, we will be perhaps distributing them through some of the schools or school boards, as we did with a previous game known as O Canada that some of your viewers might be familiar with. Whether we distribute in the schools or through school boards, of course, depends on the individual provinces, since it's their responsibility.
Is this not a kind of desperate gambit to whip up interest in new areas of the, not saying there shouldn't be, but to whip up interest?
Well, it's certainly
not
seem
quite right for you to be doing this.
It's not a desperate gambit. It certainly is, however, a desire on our part to whip up interest. Sure. Whether it's right for me to do it or not, Mr. Webster, I don't know. All I can say is that nobody else is doing it. And it is possible that if other agencies of government, rather than someone who's working for Parliament, tried to do it, that they'd be accused of propagandizing or something of the sort. I've got no axe to grind, except that I would like to think that young people in this country can appreciate that there are countries all over the world, as I said earlier, where more than one language is spoken, and it's important to learn more than one language. By the way, that kit, as we call it, includes not only a game, but a large poster with 4 linguistic maps on it, which can be pinned up on the wall, and we think are rather interesting maps, and a little booklet which has a number of facts and figures about language which are of some interest, we think.
Now, before we get into the nastier political sides of your job, is it not a fact that you and your predecessor, what was his name, Spicer?
You're the first person I've met who didn't know his name, Jack.
I even did an interview with him in French on Radio Quebec, on television. It was a riot.
I'll bet.
That both of you take the very sane, sensible ground that the only way this country can ever beat the official language's problem with its political overtones is to start it in the schools.
That's right.
How do we stand on the schools now?
Well, we stand a lot better than probably we did the last time I had the privilege of being on this show with you, and we certainly stand an awful lot better than we did a decade ago, always at the elementary level. At the secondary level, I regret to say, across the country, we don't do so well because secondary schools long ago took off any form of obligatory requirements for courses. Kids take what they want to take, and most of them don't want to take French.
Well, isn't it quite abominable that to get into a university in this country, certainly talking about BC, you do not require a second language? So they go into a university semi-literate, in my humble view.
Well, I agree with that. Actually, to be fair to your universities, I believe that UBC is one of the few in the country that is either thinking about or is on the point of requiring a language.
They certainly haven't done it up to now, I know.
No, they haven't, but I believe that that is either in their plans or already decided. And if I'm right about that, they're one of the more advanced institutions in this country.
When I went to a secondary school in Glasgow in the Depression, we were required to take Latin, English, believe it or not, and we also took French and German. I suppose it's just the general downgrading of the permissive type of free education to create a whole happy little human being.
I did the same thing, Jack, in the 40s, oddly enough, exactly the same languages. I believe that it was a mistake to remove requirements because I don't think that youngsters should be just allowed to pick a la carte whatever they want to study in school. And I think, in fact, that the educators are coming around to agree with people like you and me on this, and they are going back to what they call a core of subjects. Now, I would just hope that one of that core might be a second language. Incidentally, I don't mind if that second language is just stated in that way, second language, and not necessarily French, because I think that most youngsters would end up studying French, and those who want to study another language, if they want to study Japanese in this part of the world, that's fine. That's great.
Well,
they'll find it harder, probably.
Oh, except that if you're going to deal with the people that own BC, you're going to have to speak Japanese. Now, how do we... That's my remark, not associated with you.
No, I didn't say
Okay. You'll get a flock of requests. Tilt it forward, he says. How do they get
anyone who...
Anything for free, people will write for.
You write to the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages, 66 Slater Street, S-L-A-T-E-R, in Ottawa. If I could remember numbers, I'd tell you the postal code, but I can't. I'm looking for it on the box, and I don't see it.
Oh, yes, I can give you it. K1A O-T for Tommy 8. Kia Otate. K-I-A-O-T 8. And you'll get lots of requests.
I hope so.
How many you got to give away? 200,000?
200,000. We have 300,000 of the little booklet and 400,000 of the map, which we hope will be the most popular of all.
Max Yalden and Webster. Might take some phone calls to Max, too, although I've got some questions to ask him after the break. It must be impossible for Max Yalden, the Commissioner of Official Languages, to avoid the political heat in this country. Here we are now in the middle of a constitutional debate, the entrenchment of languages, and Levesque says right out, straight up, he does not want French language entrenched in any other part of the country for the obvious reason that he doesn't want English entrenched in the province of Quebec. Is my interpretation correct?
Well, I think he said precisely that. He does not want any entrenchment of any language rights because he does not want in any way for the power of the legislature of Quebec, the National Assembly as they call it down there, to be limited in any way by the Constitution.
Has he not been ruled against on Bill 101 yet?
He was ruled against on Bill 101 in respect of the use of the two languages in the courts and in the documents of the legislature, yes.
So
I presume that's what he wants to avoid. But he can't avoid that in the new Constitution, because that would stay in any Constitution.
If I go to court in Quebec now, I therefore can be tried in the English language.
That's right. Now, to be fair, Jack, and I think your listeners, your viewers should appreciate this. It never was a case of individuals like you and me on trial in Quebec. It was what they call corporate persons. It was that was the issue in question. There never was any question of you, me, or anyone else being unable to be tried in English in Quebec.
Oh, in other words, but they took that area which we'll call corporate law,
right.
civil suits, we'll say, for instance, and these were carried out entirely in the French language.
They were to be, and the official version of a law was to be French. Not that there wouldn't be a translation, there would be, but the official version of a law was to be French. And the Supreme Court said that that was out.
The interpretation, therefore, of the law would come from the slightly different nuance of French language, like it or lump it.
Could do.
Like it or lump it.
That's right.
Was it not also a question under Quebec law that if I wish to practice as a member of the legal profession, or as an accountant, or as a nurse, that I was required to be bilingual within a certain date?
Yes, I think they've had requirements like that for quite a while, but it's clear that Bill 101 makes them strict requirements for a whole range of professions of the sort you're saying.
Was the federal government not weak in not challenging these basic lack of freedoms for English-speaking citizens in Quebec?
Well, I guess I better make my spiel immediately, Jack. You'd have to ask the federal government. As you know, I'm an employee of the Parliament, an officer of the Parliament.
Yes.
However, I can try to explain.
It's the kind of thing which you might put in your report.
My impression is that the federal lawyers told their political masters that they would get nowhere with that kind of challenge, that the only place that was likely to be a hope of a successful legal challenge was exactly where the bill was challenged. In respect to the courts and the legislature, and that challenge was almost immediately brought by a group of private citizens. There are a couple of other challenges in the courts having to do with signage, for example, against the requirement for unilingual French signage, and I think another one that touches on education, but they are in the courts, and I don't know what the result is.
What is the situation as of this moment, which must be within your area of concern? If a young British Columbian has moved to a job in Montreal and is English unilingual, children must go to a French-speaking school.
Well, the law provides, and here again I find myself explaining somebody else's law, it's not quite that. The law says that you can have an exemption for 3 years, and furthermore that exemption can be extended for another 3 years. So it depends on what your hypothetical young man and his family are going to do. I believe, although you'd have to ask the next Quebecer who comes through here, official Quebecer.
They're not very keen on talking about it.
Well, I believe that if it were clear from the terms of that young man's employment and the arrangement with his firm, if his firm would vouch for him or whatever is required by way of proof, that he could get an exemption. However, let's put it this way, if anyone like myself who were just simply to move to Quebec for my own business with children, they would have to be educated in French, yes.
Especially if they were young
Unless
children.
it's temporary, in other words.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to Quebec as a more or less permanent or indeterminate resident, yes, the answer is yes.
Gladys, have you got that letter about the customs officers? Can we raise that? We're still getting the odd complaint. I still pull the legs of judges who go on courses.
Well, you know, some of these judges who've gone on French courses have done very well in the French language. You were talking about customs men. These are people who go on
Customs
French
men
language
from
courses?
Blaine, the border, who go on French language courses, fairly extended courses.
And then the allegation is they never use their French. Is that
The allegation is they only use it once in the blue
Once
moon.
in a blue moon. Well, I guess that depends on where it's posted, where they're posted. I think, for example, at the Vancouver International Airport, they have a chance to use it reasonably frequently. I even asked for some estimates and was told that in the peak months, which is the winter and spring, I guess people going to Hawaii or California, it would be towards 50 times a day that there would be a requirement for French. Now, you may say that's nothing compared to, I don't know how many thousands of English speakers are going through, but I don't think that that's unreasonable, that you have people on duty there who can speak French. Now, what about the border between this country and the U.S. is another matter.
I haven't got the letter, doesn't matter. But I have a little nag to you. I was appalled as a bilingual Canadian, I'm lying, to see an advertisement to join the Canadian Armed Forces. There is no life like it. And other advertisements plugging the liberal line, part of the $6 million stuff on how we can, such a great country, in English only.
Well,
why do you allow that?
In my part of the country, that ad for the forces, which I've seen a couple of times. In fact, I jogged past one of them in the morning.
There. It's up there. There's no life like it.
Well, it says La vie dans les forces est imbattable in our part of the world as well. It is a bilingual ad. Half English, half French. Same thing.
Not ours.
The constitutional one, I've not seen it. They've obviously chosen to have that one in French and in English. Perhaps they don't want to upset you in this part of the world. I think that they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. If they put it up in both languages, they're going to get a lot of complaints. If they don't put it up in both languages, they're going to get a lot of complaints likewise. I think that as long as we treat the two languages equitably, and that doesn't mean equally, because equally is going to mean shoving French down people's throats out here and shoving English down people's throats in the middle of Quebec. I'm not trying to shove anything down anybody's throat, but I think if we treat the two languages equitably, we'll be a lot better off and we'll understand one another a lot better.
You've been coming out here for years, so did Spicer. I take a reasonably tolerant view on French language. I've accused Trudeau to his face of failing to explain the Official Languages Act.
So have I.
Oh, we're together on that. Yeah. They muffed it, to be truthful.
Yes.
Have we any calls to Max? Gladys? Out of these calls for Max? Let's do a short section of telephone calls and just take them cold and regardless.
Okay.
After the break. We put your map up for you. You're very proud of your map in your giveaway game. What is it? Where's the map? Bring up the map.
There's the map.
The map.
There's
the map.
There's the map. There's
the map.
Well, it's a map of all the official languages of the world, and I've been told by a lot of people that they have found this useful in talking to youngsters about language. Not necessarily teaching language or teaching geography, but giving young people a picture of the way the world looks in terms of language.
We remember the good old days when the map was largely red and everybody had to speak English.
The map was largely red, and indeed you see some red there still, which is the results of many years of that map being red. Those are countries where either English is the language, the official language, or one of the official languages.
A couple of calls to Max Yalden, Commissioner of Official Languages. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Yalden.
Good morning.
I'll tell you what your bilingual program has done to us. I work for a national company. I have men come here on course. When you have 23 English-speaking people in the class and one French-Canadian, and the French-Canadian sits there and looks at you right in the eye and says, this is a bilingual country, why is the instruction not being given in French? To me, this is ludicrous. And the other thing...
Well, he's just being awkward.
It's awkward. It's awkward. He had to be asked to go home. The other thing is...
He must have been very awkward.
Very awkward and stupid. And the other thing is that you look at the air transportation business, the manuals that are put out by Douglas and Boeing and all that kind of thing. Do you know what your government is demanding?
They're not being translated, those manuals, sir.
They're all demanding that.
No, they're not.
Don't kid me that they're not.
No, they're not. I ought to know. I mean, it's I who have to try to decide what the law means in this respect, and I'm telling you we're not having those manuals translated. There are a lot of other things we believe should be translated, but my understanding that I've been given to understand by the experts is that not even Air France has those things
Can I cite you a third thing?
Well, yes, try a third
As
one.
to your 23 and 1, I can't say, sir. I don't know what the circumstances of your course were. I don't know whether the fellow who came out here thought it was going to be bilingual. I don't know whether you run courses in the East.
No.
I have no notion. I don't know your company, sir. I don't, of course, want to pry into your business, but it is awfully difficult for me to reply in a hypothetical
Fair enough.
way.
Third point. What's your third point?
The third point is that the national airline carrier, so-called national airline carrier, has a policy that in the summertime people are brought from the prairie areas to Vancouver to serve on the counters because of the heavy traffic. Do you know what happens now? All those extra positions in the summertime are demanded to be French Canadians.
No,
And this really...
Well, I
let me
find
put it
that-
this way.
wait a minute.
Put it this way.
Firstly, I don't think they're demanded to be French Canadians. They may ask for people who can speak French. My understanding of a French Canadian, as I was brought up on the term, means someone whose mother tongue was French, but I think what they're interested in is people who can speak, firstly. Secondly, I doubt whether all of them are required to be French speaking. I'll tell you, if they were, the service would be a lot better across the country from Air Canada than in fact it is, and we wouldn't get any complaints, which in fact we do.
You do not get many complaints.
We do get complaints. What I'm saying to your listener is that, your viewer, that if all those French-speaking Canadians were pouring into Air Canada offices, I doubt we'd get any complaints.
This is a letter which I'll give you. Every 2 weeks for the past several months, a group of customs officers leave their posts at Pacific and Douglas border crossings for the Chateau Laurier, etc. And it goes on with a great amount of detail. In case it's a pack of lies or exaggeration, may I give it to you and ask you to return to me with the answers, if that's a matter worth, because it looks like a bit of a waste of public money.
I will look into it, and I'll write you back, and I'll be delighted if you read my letter out on your program.
If you'll also let me have a copy of that back, too. I'll trust you with it.
Okay. I'll send you the whole thing back.
Do you want to speak to Max Yalden?
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
I just one sad observation, Mr. Webster. I'm a former Quebecer, and all I hear in British Columbia is it is a punishment almost to learn French. And I really think that the media could play that up a little bit.
Punishment to learn French. There are thousands, hundreds and hundreds of children going to French classes in British Columbia now, with great success.
Maybe hundreds, but there are thousands that still consider it a punishment, and really, that is sad, isn't it?
Well, you're both right, ma'am. Surely Mr. Webster's right when he says that there are a number of youngsters studying, particularly in immersion courses, and very successfully. But you're right, too, that there are lots of people who regard it as not only punishment, but cruel and unusual punishment, as the U.S. Constitution says.
Surely that's merely a lack of educational sophistication.
Well,
I don't think so, Mr. Webster. I think the mentality runs from graduates, of which my sons are UBC graduates, right down. He is now in an oil company in Calgary, and his children are learning French.
Of course they should.
They have a very
It's a measure of sophistication, and any young Canadian should obviously have both languages now if he wants to have a future at the top of anything in this country.
Of course.
I think so, yes.
Thank you. My thanks to Max Yalden. I'll bet you give away all your games. I hope they're not wasted, but used fruitfully.
Well, I hope they will be. And no, they won't be wasted. They'll be used, and they'll be used well, and I hope they'll make a difference.
Can I have a freebie for my grandchildren in Kamloops?
You certainly can. We'll send you one, Jack.
No.
You can have that one. Great. Okay.
And I don't owe you $3?
No, you don't.
Do other people have to pay?
No, free.
Because I don't want any...
Other people have already paid. It's the taxpayers' money, as I said. That's why we wouldn't, of course, be in a position to sell it.
My thanks to Max Yalden. Next, we're going to meet an odd fellow. I've only seen him on commercials. They tell me he's quite bright. We'll find out soon. He doesn't have a lisp. He sounds like he has one. His name is Alan Thicke. After the break. When I was a young boy in the newspaper business, I was told on one occasion when I had to write a story that it was a brass check. A brass check means a check you can't, that really you can't bounce because you got to give a plug to somebody. Well, I'm only too pleased to give a plug this morning. We had a program on BCTV, syndicated across the country for a number of years, which was instantly identifiable by a set of magnificent teeth. And the man who has replaced Mr. Alan Hamill Teeth is a handsome young josher called Alan Thicke.
And I had none at all, so,
And you have no teeth at all.
Pleasure to meet you,
Nice
Jack.
to meet you, Alan. You are a famous Canadian who's been living in Los Angeles in the flesh pots and the degeneracy of that country now for, what, 10 years?
Isn't it glorious? Yes, 10 years I've been in Los Angeles, but commuting to Canada all the while, continuing my associations professionally and personally up here. I still have family in Toronto. My parents live there. I came back and produced 4 Anne Murray specials and Produced the Bobby Vinton series in Toronto.
And you also produced
René Simard.
René
I did here in
Simard
Vancouver.
out of
yes.
Vancouver.
Yes. So I've always tried
And
to
you
maintain...
write songs.
Write music, yes I do.
Did any of them bomb or did any of them go?
20 theme songs I've had on American television shows so far, several of which are still running.
Such as?
Different Strokes, Facts of Life. Game show themes are a very big business. You know, I wrote, for instance, there's a show on called Wheel of Fortune, which Merv Griffin owns, an NBC show. And that was 6 or 7 years ago. That music runs 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And royalties are paid per minute of music used. So I have a thriving publishing and writing company with no hit songs.
Terrific.
It's a very commercial approach to songwriting.
But didn't you write hit songs? Aren't you married to Gloria Loring?
Yes, I am.
Didn't you write a couple of songs for her?
I have. I help her with her act, her stage work, and her album recordings. I've also written songs for most of the artists for whom I've written or produced television shows, including Barry Manilow and Olivia Newton-John and Anne Murray, not all of which have been recorded commercially on albums, but all of which have been used on their television programs. So I have a varied musical and comedic background, and I love the work.
Well, comedic. Is that a new word?
Well,
What is a comedic background?
Well, if you've ever met my grandmother, Jack, you would understand. No,
Is she Mrs. Comedic?
I have the last of the Red Hot grandmas as part of my lineage, and wonderful Northern Ontario, very Canadian, dry sense of humor.
Oh,
and,
you mean comedy?
Yes, yes.
Oh, comedic. That's what fooled me.
You thought it was
I
me.
thought she was
being ethnic.
Polish and that was her name.
No, she. At least half of my work has been in comedy. I produced and wrote America Tonight and Fernwood Tonight.
Oh, Fernwood Tonight.
Yes,
You
yes,
did that.
I did those.
You're a
And
wit.
well, thank you, Jack. I often get asked.
That was a repulsive show.
Thank you. Well, that's what made it so successful.
it was really repulsive.
It was satirical comedy at its most obtrusive.
It was so close to the truth, though, wasn't it?
Well, I often get asked why or how a fellow from Northern Ontario could work with and for Norman Lear in a production of that magnitude, and the truth is that Northern Ontario is Fernwood, and for all of us who have ever lived in small towns anywhere in Canada, we know that mentality and the activity in those towns and those people. We are those people.
What was the name of that guy in Fernwood Tonight?
Martin Mull played Barth Gimble, and Fred Willard played Jerry Hubbard.
I hated them.
Yeah, but they were fun to hate, weren't they?
No, they were. Yeah, they were. Repulsive was the word.
Yes, seedy. It was low rent. It was
yeah.
a low rent show.
And the fat guy was Barth?
The bigger of the two was Jerry Hubbard. That was Fred Willard. But now I go back to Kirkland Lake, where I was born, a gold mining community in Northern Ontario.
Dare you go back?
A couple of times a year. And I cannot write anything as funny as the local talk show, the morning show that they have at 9 o'clock in Kirkland Lake. The mayor, in his office, has a black and white videotape camera, and the first thing you see in the morning, if you're watching at 2 minutes to 9, is some static on your screen, and then a figure will walk around in front of the camera. It's the mayor who has just turned on his camera. He sits at his desk like you do, makes his calls, only it's about his laundry and his dog and where was his son last night, and his girl brings him coffee. It seems he's having something with his secretary, more than coffee and dictation. And there is a situation comedy happening every morning in Kirkland Lake for an hour where you find out of everything more than you'd ever want to know about the community.
You just given me my retirement plan.
And this guy's the mayor.
I'll put a live camera in over at Salt Spring.
Right,
Get up in the morning.
Yes.
Look for my glasses.
That's his act.
Stand in the shower.
I'll get you some tapes of that show, if they're sophisticated enough to tape it. But the point is, that is Fernwood. That is America Tonight.
Do you think this is much different?
Well, no, here you get on in the morning.
We're not that much different.
No, you get on in the morning.
We're not that much different.
You get miserable right from word one.
We have as low a level of humor and importance as anything out of Fernwood Tonight. And there are occasions when we have as many phonies as Fernwood Tonight.
Sure. Well, we ought to get along great.
Rock singers on your show?
Yes, we have the singers, and we have we have them on my show too.
And no, your show, not my show.
Yes,
comedics? You have comedics
yes,
too?
People with comedic backgrounds, if that is their ethnic persuasion. People of the comedic persuasion.
They're not Muslims.
No.
After the break. So he makes lots of money. He's got music publishing companies. He writes themes for the Joker's
You
Wild.
said this was a big budget show, though, and it wasn't Fernwood. And I've got the Webster coming right off my cup. I mean, this is a self-adhesive thing. They changed this to Heart right after this program's over. They put a new thing on there. Jack.
That was in the instructions of the vice president in charge of productions, Bill Elliott. He said, "Save money on the labels."
It's working.
It's working. As a matter of fact, if you're not careful, I'll take it off and slap it on your forehead.
I think Bill grows his own coffee beans too, judging that.
I hate to ask you this. Are you on the air yet?
Yes, we started a week ago, and thank you for being a regular viewer.
Was it good?
I haven't seen it yet myself. We've been so busy taping.
You know if it's good. You know when you've done a show if it's a clunker.
It feels good. Most of the time the show feels good. We won't have any real results for 6 or 8 weeks yet.
Who was on your first show?
Judy Collins.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Franco Columbu, who was a Mr. Muscles kind of fella. And I don't remember who else. And that is not to be disrespectful to the guests, but we taped so quickly, we taped 3 or 4 programs per day, that by the 3rd show I don't remember where I've been or who I've spoken to. I know at the end of the day if I've had fun, but I really don't know the sequence. And
well, you're, of course, one of the Canadians ex-CBC. You managed to survive CBC. This is your life, Alan Thicke.
Just barely.
How did you escape?
I escaped because at the time Len Casey, who has since been busted for fraud, defrauding Ontario Place, that was a famous case in Ontario a few years ago. Len Casey was the head of the CBC Variety Department when I was there.
I'm beginning to like you. The guy's got a memory. You know.
When I was, well, he was a significant character in my life because I had been at the CBC for 3 years. I was 22 years old, and Len Casey was coming in and saying, the CBC is not a training ground for Canadian entertainment. Go prove yourself somewhere else before we put these new show ideas of yours on the air. Now, I was making a living, and a comfortable one, and had no responsibilities at that age. I did not leave and go to the United States out of greed. I went out of Len Casey's CBC bureaucratic frustration, knowing that I would be doing the same things over and over again, and no new programs would be done unless I proved myself somewhere else, which usually means the United States. And then after you do, there's very little reason to come back. And it took the CBC 5 or 6 years, and this will sound immodest, but it took them that long to get me back, and I'm not alone. There was a wave of Canadians
That was when you
down
came back and did the Anne Murray stuff and Rennie Simard show, and what was the other one you did?
Bobby Vinton I did for CTV. Now, I have, at the same time, a real love-hate relationship with the CBC. The CBC is the best training ground in the world, and with the exception of Len Casey's own regime, has been fabulous to me.
Tell me, did you like Casey?
Big fan, big fan. But, for instance, Jack McAndrew, who was head of CBC Variety recently and has just left, I think has made great strides in the CBC Variety programming department, and I think that it is a forward-looking organization now. But there were several of us who were driven to the United States out of frustration, not for dollars, but for something new to do.
When you were driven to the United States for something new to do, how did you break in? Because, you know, I've often wondered why I've never been discovered as a character. If Larry Mann can be an actor, I'm a better actor than Larry Mann ever was.
Well,
Besides, I'm fatter.
Well, in my own case, and maybe this will serve as some sort of instruction manual to you, Jack, I met a gorgeous blonde and fell in love and moved down to Los Angeles with her and a secretary friend of hers.
Why didn't you marry an American? That would have been easier for your work permit.
Well, she was.
Oh,
I met her, yes.
Marriage
Gloria.
of convenience.
Yeah, well, it was a marriage of pleasure, and the convenience was part of the pleasure, I
To
suppose.
be a Yank.
No, yeah, she was American. I did meet her in Toronto, though. She was performing at the Royal
Don't
York
have
Hotel.
to make excuses to me, Alan.
I know, I have to make them to her.
No,
I guess
do you
I don't
have to blush?
explain.
Right, yeah.
So we went to Los
How old are you,
Angeles
by the way?
together. I'm 33. She was living in New York, and I was living in Toronto. We moved to Los Angeles together, and a secretary friend of hers was working on a new show that was just starting up. Heard that Gloria's boyfriend was in town, and he was a would-be comedy writer from Canada, which seemed somehow to be mutually exclusive terms to this secretary, but she did agree to get me an interview with the producers, and I did, and I won an Emmy for my first job.
What was that?
It was called The Loman and Barkley Show. It was on NBC, and it was a comedy program. and it did very nicely. And I thought Emmys would be easy to come by, and I'd have to get a bigger mantelpiece, and I didn't get another one for several years after.
Yeah, but there was a whole flock of young Canadians, kid reporters from the Vancouver Sun and kids out of CBC Toronto, who used to fill all the credits on the Rowan and Martin show
That's
and many of the other shows.
Exactly right. It was the boom time.
Name half a dozen. I can.
Of the people or the
Young
shows.
Canadians who became comedy writers.
Alan Bly and Ferrier and Tadman and Earl Pomerantz and Lorne Michaels, who produces Saturday Night Live, Chris Beard. We were all the CBC at that same time.
I think Saturday Night Live was really a development of your Fernwood theme.
No, it was independently developed and brilliantly so by a Canadian, Lorne Michaels, and his wife, daughter of Frank Schuster.
Now
who
that's
writes
so
on the
sick,
show.
I like it.
Yes, well, Saturday Night Live was wonderful, especially those first couple of years, and it's difficult to sustain anything much beyond that.
Are you
I
going to
think,
do
but it
some
sure-
Saturday Night Live satirical nasty stuff, or are you going to stick to a nice, happy, wholesome format?
You mean on my program?
Yeah, on the Alan
We'll be
Thicke
basically
show.
happy and wholesome, but we'll try to surprise from time to time. We're restricted by time and budget and time of day and audience demographics in what an afternoon talk show can and should be, I believe. I would be doing a different program slightly, maybe more adapted to my own personal likes and dislikes if I were on at 11:30 at night. I think that you have to be conscious of who the audience is, who's available to you at that time of day, and what they like. And I can relate to that easily and well because I've produced those kind of programs in the past. And
Fellow's quite bright, isn't he? Alan, best of luck.
well, thank you, Jack.
What
Pleasure.
time of day is it on?
I think it's on at 3:30, 3 o'clock, or 3:30. You will have. It's one of those consult your local listings. They don't tell me because then I'd be watching it instead of being in the studio taping.
My
It is
thanks to
definitely
Alan
afternoon.
Thicke.
Thank you.
Sounds very bright, even though he's just got ordinary teeth. Webster after the break. My conscience has been troubling me a little bit this morning because I have not had time since I got on the air to give you any kind of comprehensive study of some of the downtown developments proposed by the provincial and the civic government of Vancouver. There's the Avenue of the Provinces, of course, the billion-dollar caper with whatever, $100, $200, $300 million stadium that's going to hold baseball and all the rest of that jazz. But more importantly, there's the Pier BC. When Pier BC came along first time round, and as you know, they've demolished much of the stuff on the old pier, sounded like not a bad idea. $25 million, it was rather a gracious kind of arched operation. And it looked like a good thing for cruise ships in the convention center. But it strikes me something has gone wrong down the way towards fulfillment. And I've been reading some of the marathon documents on the troubles likely to be caused by the new type of development. It's not just a convention center now, it's a convention center. First of all, it's not going to cost $25 million. It's going to come to $52 million. City of Vancouver is to pay all the operating costs and deficits. City of Vancouver won't collect property taxes from the convention center. The city will have to pay cost overruns on the access to the center. The city will share in overruns at the cruise ship berth. And that means higher taxes for Vancouver, despite all the provincial foo-for-all. And then, to complete the money they needed, they had to make a deal with a hotel and office complex. I think it was some $8.5 million. And instead of a nice graduated place on Pier BC, we're going to see something like this, presumably. I think we've got it on videotape, which will give you a little view of the kind of thing that's going to go on down at the foot of Burrard Street. I hope we get a straight-up view. Now, I'm not one who believes that the waterfront views must be preserved from everything and anything at any particular time. But when you think of what Marathon might be planning behind that, you begin to wonder what kind of downtown view there will be of the beautiful North Shore mountains. Now, Marathon Realty have to give $3.5 million towards the access for this business, and they'll have the right to build towers between the center and the city. Even the Marathon people, and you know, Marathon at CPR, Marathon are very powerful people, they're complaining bitterly about the plans for this convention center. And they say that the area around the centre and the railway tracks and the airspace and the other buildings and the jinking in and out will become a traffic nightmare, and that there will be very limited access for pedestrians. Now, why do I mention it today? Well, I'm generally against the establishment. And the establishment seems to be quite cosily decided on okaying everything, and away they go, no problem, very little public discussion, and a public meeting tonight, a public hearing. So I want to tell those who are interested that tonight at 7:30 in the British Room, the convention floor of the Hotel Vancouver, the Council of the City of Vancouver will hold a public hearing for amendments for the bylaw. The cruise ship terminal, the convention centre, the hotel, the office, the retail, the restaurants, the accommodations for buses and taxis, the parking, the public open space, and any consequential amendments. Now, the woman who jabbed my conscience into putting this to you today, and we may have a crew there tonight, is on 351, I trust. Mary Pack.
Yes, Jack, thanks. You made a very good resume of the problems. And
I'm not saying
all Vancouver taxpayers will come out and learn about the problems firsthand and make their priorities and their problems known too. Thanks very much.
Well, now, I'm not saying that I am totally against the Pier BC Convention Centre, but what worries me most of all was the report that I read by Gordon Campbell. I think he used to be Philip's executive assistant, didn't he? He works for Marathon now, and he says the area around the centre will become a traffic nightmare and there is no access for pedestrians. So it's something that people like yourself should get up and speak your little piece tonight and not let the politicians bully it through without you having a say. 7:30 tonight, Hotel Vancouver, British Room. What's on tomorrow? A pile of people, all good, 9 a.m. precisely.